Arts and Design in the Art Nouveau city, Budapest. Now, I'm going to try my Hungarian. Now, remember that I'm dyslexic, so I always struggle with how you pronounce things. And the G and the Y that you're looking at there is not how you think you're going to pronounce it. It's actually a conjoined, the G and the Y are conjoined, so they make one sound. And confusingly, it's a J. So it's not Magyar, it's Magyar, like that, Magyar. And this also helps you with Maholi Nagy, who again is the famous Bauhaus Hungarian designer. So the front cover, as you can see, of my book, Art Nouveau Architecture, actually has a view of the wonderful roof line of the Casa Batlló by Antonio Gaudi. And if you've ever been to Barcelona, you'll know that there are literally thousands of what they refer to there as modernista buildings. And so I wanted to start with this, link between Budapest and Barcelona for obvious reasons. They are very, very similar cities in many ways, and that they are both struggling for independence from what they feel to be an oppressive power. In the case, of course, of Barcelona, it's Catalan, and they want to break away from the central government. And the same thing is true of Hungary. They feel oppressed by the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and they wish to assert their own identity in the same way that Catalan does. To emphasize this, we are coming up to, in terms of the history of Hungary, their celebrations for their Millennial moment. So they celebrated 1,000 years of the Hungarian Empire in 1896. And that probably is the main reason why there is so much secession, as they like to call it there, as after Vienna secession, why there is so much architecture and art, a sort of renaissance around 1896. So I'm showing you the Millennial column, which some of you might recognize if you have ever been to Budapest. It's part of the ornamentation of Heroes Square, and it shows the Archangel Michael holding up the crown of Hungary and the double cross, which you might think is the double cross of Lorraine, but it also happens to be the double cross of Hungary. And above it, in a fantastic mosaic, my Miska Rot, you'll meet him later, we have this concept of the Hungarian nation. And there's a sort of warrior on the left-hand side, and like Mother Russia, but it's Mother Hungary on the other, farmers, there's a sort of the general population, if I can put it that way. But the whole idea is that Hungary is sort of enthroned in the middle of the image. It's the largest of these mosaics that you'll see out and about in central Budapest. To understand this striving for national identity, we just need to wind the clock back a little later, to 1848. Now, if you watched the television series Victoria, you might remember this moment. 1848 was the year of revolution, and Louis Kossuth, who was the great revolutionary leader who tried to break Hungary away from the Austro-Hungarian Empire in the year of revolution, he failed inevitably and was an exile, and a very distinctive hat that sort of became a bit of a fashion statement. This is his tomb, okay, in the, Budapest has an amazing necropolis, but this is his tomb, just to give you an idea of how he is revered as the sort of founding father of the concept of an independent Hungary. And his full title, as you can see, was Governor President of the Kingdom of Hungary. So there was an uneasy relationship between Hungary and Austria, which would eventually be, well, compromised. So they will agree that Hungary will have a certain amount of autonomy. They will share the same army, they will share the same monarchy, but they will have a level of devolution. So rather like the relationship between England and Scotland. And this compromise was celebrated with the coronation of Franz Joseph. So he's Emperor of Austria and King of Hungary. And this takes place in 1867. So there is Franz Joseph a little later in life. As you can see, he's one of the longest reigning monarchs in Europe. Those 48 to 16 are his his era on the throne, not his birth and death dates. You might know his beautiful wife, Sissy, as we like her nickname, so the Lady Di of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. She was assassinated as well to add to the romance. And we see her down the bottom and in the black and white photograph in this magnificent dress that she actually wore for the coronation. And you see the coronation taking place in the bottom right-hand corner. And it took place in Matthias Church. I'm going to explain the importance of Matthias Corvinus a little later on. I mean, all the time you're going to think you're a little bit in a Dracula movie, because of course a lot of my story is going to take us to Transylvania. We haven't made the place up, neither did Bram Stoker, but Corvinus is again a sort of another name associated very much with vampiric legend. It means, by the way, raven in effect, or well, eagle or raven, and it's to do with part of his coat of arms, raven. But I'm just showing you the inside here of the Matthias Church, beautifully restored quite recently, to show you that there's a very strong Gothic element going on in Hungary. If I said this was designed for you by Pugin, you might, you know, Augustus Welby Pugin, you might easily be fooled. All the painted decoration, the sort of lavish ornamentation, the idea that the architect is in charge of the entire conception. But the most important thing is this idea that even here in Hungary, Gothic is seen to be essentially an indigenous native style. The outside of the building, however, is less, you know, recognizable in terms of its roof, because it has this absolutely amazing tile roof. So here again, crowned in here in 1867, that's Franz Joseph, and the entire ancient cathedral, which had undergone all sorts of vicissitudes, particularly during the Muslim invasion. It was briefly a mosque, well, in fact, not so briefly a mosque, rebuilt between 1833 and 1906 in its medieval form. But the important thing is that roof, because this gives us a good idea of why Hungarian secession buildings, and that's what I shall call them, not Art Nouveau, but Secession buildings, are so distinctive and unique. It's the use of ceramics, and we have one factory in particular that's really important, and that's Zsolnay. This was a company that was at the cutting edge of new technological ideas. So rather like Dalton, they're going to come up with lots of different products which are going to be used on secession buildings, both inside and out. This is known as pyrogranite and is extremely colourful, as you can see, but also very hard wearing. And Miklos Zsolnay and then his son Vilmos Zsolnay worked with a whole series of designers, and in this case a chemistry professor, to come up with these new exciting products which will make the buildings of Budapest so distinctive and will lead to one of the most famous architects, Odon Lechner, being referred to as the Antonio Gaudi of Budapest. Again, that link back to Barcelona, where again, tile is so important. So here, a little bit about this. So good, get the Zsolnay out of the way, and then you'll understand as I'm going through what I'm referring to all the time. So the factory is actually in Pest, that's P-E-C-S, which is southern Hungary. This is the Zsolnay family tomb. I do love the lions rippling down to either side. The important character in our story is Vilmos Zsolnay, who his father had sort of started the project in 1853, which is why you have it on all of the marks, which have got 5 towers. So the 5 towers on the Zsolnay mark is a reference to the 5 churches of the town of Pest. Vilmos takes over from his father running the factory in 1863. So you'll sometimes see that date on the marks as well. And eventually, and I'm sorry, they all have the same names, Miklos, which is Vilmos's son, will also join in, and he'll become an important designer in the 1890s. So if we just say Zsolnay, it gets around the problem. In 1893, with the gain of help of various chemists, including Bartha, that's our university professor, they come up with Eosin, which means flush of dawn. I'll show you an example in a minute. And it's basically luster. So we have companies here in England like Pilkington and of course William de Morgan, who also specialize in luster. But Eosin is rather different because it's more like, sort of, if I could say, it sounds awful, it's iridescent, like the color of petrol. You know, when you get that oily sheen on water, that's the best way to describe Eosin. So here it is. It can be used to clad entire buildings. So the Bella building, so in fact, Bella is his Christian name. So another very confusing thing about Hungary is the surname goes first and then the Christian name. So Lechner is the architect's surname. And he was originally a follower of Lechner and then develops his own very individual style. So Lechner. So here you can see the Eosin used on the exterior of a bank, okay? And it's deploying Hungarian folk art motifs in terms of its vocabulary. More of that later. We're inside, on the left-hand side, we're inside the amazing Liszt Academy, which is a riot of Zsolnay ornamentation, which explains why you've got two people singing at the top. It's a music academy, and you can see how the entire surface of that column is a combination of marble and this highly iridescent tile material, Eosin. But the important thing is you can see here, you can use it either inside or outside. So it's very durable. There's a very good chance, although I've never actually seen it fully documented, that the amazing Majolica house in Vienna on the Linke Wiensel, this is likely to be Zsolnay. By 1900, Zsolnay was the biggest ceramics manufacturer in the whole of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So if you're looking at any building in, say, Serbia or what is now modern-day Romania, like Targo Murs, which we'll see later, if you're looking at a building with ceramics on, it's likely to be Zsolnay. Okay, so I just thought I'd point that out, that that's very likely to be the material that you're looking at here on the Majolica house. And if you've ever had the good fortune to visit the Gellert Baths, which is a Secession masterpiece, all of this is Zsolnay. And of course, one of the important things about Budapest is it's floating on hot water. I mean, it has many spas. They just bubble up everywhere. The Gellert is perhaps the most famous because it's a very large bath and hotel complex. And I've been very privileged to stay there a couple of times, where they provide you with a robe and a pair of slippers and something to put on your hair, and you're able to literally have, I won't say a free go, but a cheap go in the famous thermal waters. Fantastic. So float in the middle of the bath and enjoy your Hungarian Secession experience. So perhaps these two vases give you a better idea of the iridescence of Zsolnay, and it also indicates that you're looking at a material that had multiple uses, not only in architecture, but obviously in the form of sculptural vessels. And some of Zsolnay's pieces produced around 1900, where you couldn't ask for anything more Art Nouveau. They're very much in the French style. And the Eosin can come in different colors. It can range all the way from red through all the spectrums of blues and purples to this sort of greeny goldy color, which from my point of view is what I think of as typically Zsolnay style. And if you're wandering around the city, you'll actually find the Zsolnay house. And I wanted to show you this for two reasons. Featuring the elephant at the top. It's often known as the House of the Elephant. Zsolnay took the elephant as their sort of logo, but you'll also find, a bit like when you go to visit Riga, which has got a black cat, that the elephant will sort of like follow you around Budapest. It's sort of been taken, I don't know what happened there, being taken as a sort of local logo, the sign of the elephant, anyway, at the top of the building. And you can see here, I'm showing you a close-up of this rather lovely plaque. And I love the fact that our young ladies here at Zsolnay are decorating their pots whilst rather scantily clad. So one of the other reasons I wanted to show you the House of the Elephant is to remind you, although I'm going to show you a lot of secession buildings, and believe you me, I don't think people realize the importance of Budapest. There are far more secession buildings here than I've ever spotted in Vienna, though please remember how badly Vienna was damaged in the war, and there was not much incentive to rebuild secession buildings, you know, after 1919, when the fashion for all things Art Nouveau had simply died. But nevertheless, the concentrations and the sheer variety of secession buildings in Budapest is really quite mind-blowing, and I just don't think people realize how much there is there. But I wanted to remind you that there are lots of alternatives to secession, and many people still clung to historicism as the most obvious style that they loved in Austria-Hungary was the so-called Maria Theresa style, the famous empress, mother of Marie Antoinette, associated with the Habsburg court and particularly Schönbrunn Castle. We're looking here at a reworking of Rococo forms. So remember, Rococo is mid-18th century. So there were lots of people who were never going to go for secession. They were going to prefer Gothic, or more importantly, they're going to opt for a sort of blend of historical forms, Gothic, but particularly Rococo and Maria Theresa style. So I wanted to give you a flavour of the city, as well as, you know, concentrating on the secession. And I'm sure if you've been to visit, you'll have been here to the so-called Fisherman's Bastion. Again, this is to emphasise the sort of Gothic legacy in the city, but also it's to emphasise this nationalism, this outpouring of nationalistic fervour around the 1896 Millennial celebration. This wasn't finished in time, but it was all part under Friedrich Schuleck's idea that Matthias, which is in Buda, and you're looking up at it here in the top slide, would have a very sort of suitable sacred space around it. And it's called Fisherman's Bastion because, of course, originally they fished in the Danube. I think that's happened for a while. And there are 7 towers because of the 7 chieftains of Hungary who founded Hungary in 896. Now that date, 896, is really important. If you're going to learn one date about Budapest, engrave 896 into your memory. It means also that nothing can be taller than 96 meters in the city centre. What a heavenly relief, because as you can see, it means that there are no skyscrapers apart from one slightly taller tower on the right-hand side. So nothing can be, even now, nothing can be higher than 96 meters, 896 being the critical year to celebrate 1,000 years of the Kingdom of Hungary. Our next important date in terms of understanding why it becomes such an important secession city is the merging of 3 elements. So Buda, which is where St. Matthias is, Old Buda, which is actually on an island, and then the 3rd city of Pest. All of these are crunched together to become the new metropolis of 1873. In this rush of nationalism, they decide that they want their own parliament. Imre Stendel is appointed the architect after a competition. They start on this wonderful wedding cake confection that always reminds me of the baptistry at Pisa, a bit in the centre. And again, although not completed in 1896, it was inaugurated in that critical year. And you're seeing here the view of it from the Fisherman's Terrace. And inside again, it's an absolute riot of Gothic and Renaissance ornament, historicism. And I'm just showing you one of the many painted panels commemorating the history of Hungary. And it is, of course, this concept of the nation itself, Mother Hungary, if I can put it that way, with the concept of Hungary, Hungaria in the centre, and then troops, working class, you know, the people, the Volk, rising up down the bottom. Mieszka Rot, so you pronounce the rot part, or you spell it R-O-T-H. It sounds not Roth, but more like Rot. Miska is his first name. He's Jewish, so his history was totally buried during the Soviet period. But he again is going to be a name that I mention many times because he's their Tiffany. In fact, he actually probably meets Tiffany. He certainly works with Tiffany Glass. Where he would have met Tiffany would have been at one of the big international exhibitions, the World Fairs, which are such, again, a feature of the era and allow all of this cultural interchange. So he is going to be the sort of master glass maker, you know, like Tiffany, or if we were in Nancy, Jacques Roubert. And here for the Parliament building, these are all windows in the Parliament building. As you can see, he didn't opt for Secession style. He was more than happy to adapt to what his architect wanted. And so here the windows are an interesting blend of Gothic and Renaissance forms. Matthias Corvinus, who you'll meet in a minute, he's often seen to be Hungary's Renaissance prince. He seemed to sort of introduce high culture into Hungary, particularly Italian Renaissance architectural forms. So there's an interesting blend here of Renaissance and Gothic, as you can see. And certainly the head on the one on the right-hand side, I like the monkeys in this one, by the way, synergies. The head is a Hun head. More of the Huns in a minute, but again, he's likely to be one of the so-called 7 chieftains who founded Hungary. And finally, before we leave the Houses of Parliament, this is the main chamber. Again, it's just to emphasize how Gothic it is. But even more interesting in a way is the ante-room to the main chamber in Parliament, because these figures are made out of ceramic. They are Zsolnay. It's again to remind you that Secession is a very complex mix of looking back and looking forward. They want a modern style, but it's got to be a style that expresses the distinct character of the Hungarian nation. So to represent modernity, I've got, and this again, these are made out of pyrogranite, so they are very durable. We have the photographer, and then holding his pots is Vilmos Zsolnay. So he's actually commemorated in the Parliament building. So it's this idea again that Budapest, with it now one city, Buda and Pest conjoined, was entering the modern era. They'd already started this process, obviously, before 1896, but it all sort of comes to a head. So I wanted to show you this dramatic view of looking across the river, Danube. So this is the Secessionist chain bridge. So rather amusingly and very confusingly, it's designed by William Turney Clark and built by the Scottish engineer Adam Clark, which is to sort of to emphasize the international character of the Austro-Hungarian Empire in the middle of the 19th century. But what you're looking at on the other side of the chain bridge is one of Budapest's most famous Secession buildings. It's called the Gresham Palace. We'll see it properly later. It was built by the English insurance company as a investment, really, because it was apartments and shops. But as you're entering Pest from the Buda side, this building being right at the ends of the bridge almost is like a flag saying you're leaving old medieval Buda and you're entering the new modern city of Pest. It was the first city, again, all to do with 1896, to have its own metro system. So it has the oldest metro system after London. So it was very progressive in its outlook. So I'm just showing you a map of Pest. It's quite different. Buda is hilly and Pest is very flat. And the most important thing here is there is the Secession Bridge. That is where I'm hoping, because it's right at the top. So if my cursor isn't working, hopefully near number 3 and number 5, you can see the bridge. Follow the line to Andrassy, which is this wonderful road which leads you up to this set piece, which is Hero Square and this wonderful city park. It's all part of this grandiose town plan, which is all related, all of it's related to this idea of getting ready for the Millennial celebrations in 1896. The great Andrassy Avenue leads you up to Heroes Square, and this is also where the metro runs. So if you've ever been to Budapest, you'll know that the metro, the underground, runs all the way up Andrassy. And again, just to remind you, it's the first metro system in Europe after the London metro system. So it just gives you an idea of how progressive Budapest was. And obviously we're looking from the top of the Millennial column. So remember Gabriel at the top holding the double cross and the crown. This is Count Julia Andrassy. He's interestingly seen as again a sort of founding father of the Hungarian state, but his role was in fact very much to smooth the path between the relationship between Austria and Hungary. He was foreign minister under the regime, and of course he gives his name to many, the Andrassy Avenue. So he's sort of, it's interesting, he's sort of like got a foot in both camps in the sense that he's this great Hungarian figure, but he was very much tied to the relationship with the Austrian monarchy. So there's a good view of Heroes Square. I confess I nicked that from the internet because it's very hard to get it all into your camera. And you can see in the background the famous castle, which you'll see in just a minute, which is the legacy of the Millennial celebrations. So around the bottom, something from Game of Thrones. All of this stuff is very Game of Thrones. These are the 7 tribes of the Magyar. So they enter the so-called Carpathian Basin and Pannonian Plain in 896. So this is the alleged origins. So they've come off the Russian steppes, in other words, the alleged origins of the Hungarian nation in 896. One figure stands out, and that's Arpad. And Arpad was said to be the son of Alamos, who was supposed to be directly descended from Attila the Hun. Again, we tend to forget how early Attila the Hun is. He is basically Roman. He rules over a vast but brief empire, again in the east, modern day Romania and Hungary, from 433 to 453. And so Arpad, it's the first important dynasty of the official Hungarian nation, as founded in 896. And Arpad is sort of seen to be one of these, military heroes. The founder of the country, or Gulia, which again is a very popular name for your children in Hungary. It means leader or, almost hero. So this is supposed to be Arpad. And on this is John Hyundai. That's what it sounds awful. Say it slower, Anne. Hunyadi, who is again revered as a Hungarian hero. He's not a king, he's a great king maker, because it is his son who becomes Matthias Corvinus. And here is Matthias Corvinus in what is often described as Budapest's Tivoli fountain. Dates to the Millennial moment, 1900, as you can see, and tells the story of Matthias falling in love with this young peasant girl who you see down there with her horn. He was most unfortunate in that he married a couple of times, but never produced a legitimate heir. But he is, Matthias, as in the church, Matthias, Corvinus church, is so beloved in Hungary because he was seen to be very fair, very just, but also because he introduces so many aspects of the Italian Renaissance into their culture, poetry, the arts, architecture. So Matthias is seen to be, again, one of the sort of figures in Hungarian history that every Hungarian sort of looks up to in terms of a national hero. So hopefully all of this explains a little bit about the unique character of not just Budapest, but Hungary in general. And they have their own sagas and their stories that again are all about people like Arpad and the sort of, this is the famous anonymous chronicler of the deeds of the Hungarians. It's sort of like their Mort d'Arthur. It was penned somewhere around 1200 under the reign of King Bela, again a very popular Hungarian name. And you can see here, this is again a sort of 1903 commemoration of this idea. Doesn't matter that the chronicler, we don't know his name, he's anonymous, but it is his legacy of charting all of the deeds of the Hungarians. So I suppose like more like a venerable bede would be a better way to describe him. So this is one of the legacies of the Millennial exhibition. This is the Hunyad Castle. Architect is Ignác Alpár. You can actually see him commemorated in a bust on the building. The Millennial moment, it's like a international global event. 5 million people go to visit the exhibition site. Originally, this was a temporary confection. It's a Gothic castle, fortress, and a Renaissance Rococo palace, sort of like a microcosm of Hungarian history and architectural style. But it was so popular that it was then rebuilt in a permanent form. So this is now used as a museum complex. But I particularly wanted to show you it because it's to emphasize that until really, until the end of the 19th century, for many Gothic was the national style, as commemorated here in the Austro-Hungarian Pavilion for Paris 1900. You can see the tower of Vágy Hunyad's castle is very like the tower of the temporary pavilion at Paris 1900. But by 1911, at the Turin exhibition of international modern art, amongst other things, the style is completely different. As you can see, the Gothic gone, and we've got this amazing fantasy on the sort of mythic origins of the Hungarian. I have dubbed this the Hungarian Secession style. You'll understand what I mean as our story progresses. But these are the 7 chieftains on the front. I don't know what happened to Arpad, I can only count 6, but I'm sure that these are supposed to be the 7 chieftains who founded Hungary in 896. And the style of the pavilion, it's a series of pyramids, and this relates to Hungarian tents. So we're going back to Attila the Hun, and the motifs on it are all derived from Hungarian folk art. And so this is really what makes Hungarian Secession so different. It's this interest in folk art. Now, ironically, in terms of this revival of the folk art tradition, they look to England, to the English arts and crafts movement. By 1896, obviously William Morris is dead. He dies in 1896. But they focused then really, and were able to put all of their eggs in the basket, believe it or not, of Walter Crane, who for many was seen to sort of take on the mantle of William Morris. And most importantly, he is well represented in Budapest through a series of exhibitions. Firstly in 1895, when he participates in an exhibition of foreign artists, and then 4 years later, he has his own one-man show. And so we've got here the poster, the front of Jugend, which was the famous Secession magazine, or I should actually say Jugendstil magazine that comes out of Munich. My quote from the Hungarian Quarterly, an important paper, obviously, is promoting, so Walter Crane, arguably the best-known decorative artist in Britain since the death of William Morris in 1896. This is written in 1900. And everybody fawns over him, but importantly, he is taken on a tour of Transylvania, where again, he too is blown away by the survival, I think that'd be the best word, survival stroke revival of peasant art. So I thought I'd better show you where Transylvania is, because it's not actually a sort of homogeneous area at all. It's made up of lots of individual, well, principalities, I suppose would be the best way to describe it. And Maramureş, which you can see on my map at the bottom, Maramureş is in purple right at the top. Even that is often linked to Transylvania because it's a fluid space. It's changed ownership many times. But most importantly, for the Hungarians, this is the heartland. Going back to our 7 chiefdoms, this is the heartland of Hungary. This is the true homeland, which is why they are still extremely peaked that it is now in Romania and has been since the end of the First World War, 1920. Within Transylvania, okay, so the top map has got this bright yellow bit here in the center, which has got Mureș and then Kosvana at the bottom. That is the Székely homeland. And if you want even purer Hungarian heritage, this is where you go to. So lots of my artists, and even more importantly, my architects, were drawn to this Székely homeland, where they thought that they would find the purest folk art and the purest vernacular or indigenous architecture. This sort of thing, okay? So these are the famous farmstead gateways. They are sometimes removed from their original location and taken to exhibitions, like the one at the bottom, which was displayed at the Millennial celebrations of 1896. And the important thing is that a lot of the motifs that you see in Secession architecture, the folk art motifs, are all taken from these ancient wood carvings. So here is one. They often look, you don't realize that they were originally painted. They were probably all originally painted, which brings out their folk art motifs even more strongly. There are things to look out for, these interlocking scrolls that sometimes look almost like vase shapes, birds, and then specific flowers, tulips. The tulip is a major sort of motif of Hungarian cultural identity, and cornflowers as well. So cornflowers and tulips, so it gives you your blue and your red. And Maramureş, which is, as I say, sometimes sort of lumped in with Transylvania, because at one point it was actually politically part of this sort of loose confederation of different autonomous areas. Maramureş again has this strong tradition of folk art, so there's one of their farmhouse gateways. It's a very difficult area because, as you can see, my line is yellow. It's the yellow bit at the top. There's actually a line going through it, which means that the bottom half is in Romania and the top half is in Ukraine. Now, this is at least, I hope, helping you to understand why there is still so much bad feeling and even political unrest in these areas. Romania has gone out of its way to try and Romanize its inhabitants and to suppress the Hungarian elements. So you see, again, you're back to that problem that we have with Barcelona, this sort of like upsurge of Catalan independence. This fierce nationalism will perhaps help you to understand modern day Hungary, as well as 19th century Hungary. And for my artists in search of pure Hungarian culture, well, Maramureş is going to become a major focus. Baia is its Romanian name, but hang on, Nagybayana is its Hungarian name, and Nagybayana is their Newlyn school, okay? There's an entire colony of artists there, as you'll see in a minute. So just to remind you of why you go to Romania, and to Maramureş in particular, it's to see the amazing wooden churches. So when I start talking about Transylvanian vernacular architecture, just bear those in mind. And much the same when I start talking about Transylvanian folk art, it doesn't really matter whether it's Székely or Maramureş. It's this, you know, this idea of a bold floral patterning, which sometimes almost looks rather Islamic if you don't mind me saying so. But here are my tulips at the top, and it's on everything. They're on the walls, they paint the furniture, and obviously in the national costume. So it's important to remember that we're seeing here a renaissance that, as I've often mentioned, is not restricted in secession nations to just design or architecture or painting. We have AD, who is the poet, and I'm sure you've heard of Bela Bartok, who is the musician, so like Grieg in Norway. And AD is their sort of great heroic poet, again, all to do with sagas. And down the bottom, we've actually got Bela Bartok collecting folk songs. Okay, so this folk element is really important. And Bela Bartok, one of his most famous pieces, he said it was his most important, you can go and play it later, is the Cantata Profana, which is about 9 enchanted stags, again taken from a Transylvanian ballad. So this is my reason for including Bartok here, collecting ballads. And you can see what I mean in the front of AD's poems, you know, this sort of like the stylized tulips and other sort of folk art elements that have been adapted there round the cup. And oh, hang on, I went the wrong way, my apologies. So I love this cartoon down the bottom. It's about the stags being transformed. So they're enchanted because they were originally men. They were 9 princes who love hunting so much, they are transformed into stags. The monument to them is a fountain in Budapest. So folklore, folk culture, it spills out just about into everything. We will come back to Aladar Koresfoy Kresh. He's a major figure in the Godoloy artist colony, but at this stage we're simply looking at him from the point of view of this folk tale of poor old Clara Zak. Clara Zak is very beautiful. The prince, who you see here on the left-hand side, is ogling her. He will unfortunately rape her, and the father, her father, Clara's father, attempts to, well, attempts to assassinate the prince for having defiled his daughter. That makes it worse. The entire Zak family are punished, and Clara has a very unfortunate end. They will all be executed, but Clara, very unfortunately, is executed by being dragged through the streets, literally dragged through the streets by horses. So this is her entourage, as you can see here, mourning over the dead body of Clara. But her entire family is in fact a victim of this feud. So this is Aladar Koresfoy Kresh. Hope I've got that about right. So he and Sandor Nudge go off together, having read Morris and Ruskin, to found the Godoloy artist colony. It's only just outside Budapest, okay? He is one of the many decorators of the Palace of Culture at Târgu Mureș, which is in Transylvania, modern Romania. There's 2 images of him down the bottom. The inside of the Palace of Culture, yes, it is quite stunning. And then one of his paintings at the top, the Dance of the Shamans, because again, I wanted to emphasize this idea of sort of the mystic aspects of Hungarian culture, sort of the witchy side. So there's definitely something witchy going on there, as they seem to be sort of casting the runes. Anyway, Godoloy, they have artist houses there which have survived. So Sandor Nudge will join him, and this is his studio house at the top, which, as you can see, looks very modern. If I said it was Bauhaus with that flat roof, you might have believed me. But their art is certainly not Bauhaus or austere. All the artists involved with the Godoloy colony are sort of, again, looking back to folk art in terms of searching for an Hungarian identity. Ede Vigand is also part of this group, who does the stained glass windows in the cultural palace at Tava Moors, which you'll see in a minute. We have a weaving school. I mean, this whole enterprise is back to the land. This is Ernest Jimson and C.R. Ashby, but in fact, they had greater support from the central authorities. So it will become like an arts and crafts school. There'll be many famous craftsmen who are trained there or who are taught there. So it creates an entire arts and crafts milieu. So I've given you a series of names which you can run away and look up if you want to pursue this arts and crafts element more seriously. And Istvan let's just call him Istvan, it's easier. He was actually responsible for designing this house, and he was particularly influenced by the Vienna Secession, people like Joseph Hoffmann. I think you can see that there in the house designed for Sandor Nagy. So this is just to give you an idea of what they produce. So the top image in sort of sepia is by Sandor Nagy, and is the story of Adam and Eve, the snake, and she's quite obviously alluring. And then down the bottom we have Koresh Croy, and again there's a bit of William Blake going on the left hand side, as you can see, with this image for January, and then typical symbolist work, Man in Pursuit of Death, 1905 on the other side. So you can see here the face of the beautiful woman is concealing the skull underneath. So they're an interesting mixture of what you and I would call arts and crafts and symbolism. So Aladar is his first name. It comes at the end, remember. Koresh Croy Kreisch. He's responsible for the magnificent mosaic on the front of the cultural palace. He designed various different media, but particularly rugs. So Cassandra, the puppet show, and the three princesses, who are all walking in a line, are all designs by Aladar. So he shows you that, like William Morris, he was working over a number of media. He's most famous for this, the truly awesome symbolist interior of the Liszt Academy of Music. So we've mentioned Bela Bartok, the other really important musician, composer of Hungary, is Franz Liszt. And this amazing academy, which was established in the 1870s, a brand new building, 1904 to 1907. If you see the outside of it, it looks like it should be in Vienna. It's sort of historical mishmash of neoclassical and Baroque forms. But inside, it's a Secession masterpiece, thanks to the Godaloy artists, in this case, Koresh Foy Kreisch, which, by the way, he like the Finnish artist, Galan Kalila, he takes a Hungarian form of his name. And Miska, a rot, so remember again, it's back to front, that's it. Miska is his Christian name. He does all the stained glass, and the ceramics, of course, are all courtesy of Zsolnay. So this is the entrance foyer with that amazing fountain in the center, which is a tour de force of sort of like Ravenna style mosaics, and a close-up of the Eosin lyre down the bottom. It gets better. So the atrium areas are decorated with almost like a heavenly choir. I'm sure it has a long explanation somewhere explaining who all the different figures are, but I have yet to find that. As I say, Hungarian tourist board has yet to exploit its Secession legacy as fully as it might. But you can see here, I think the important thing is angels, a heavenly choir, and this winds its way round the atrium and takes you upstairs to what is variously known as the fountain of life, the source of art, and pilgrimage to the fountain of art. Stunning. Here's a better view of it. So art as the source of life, and the inscription on it reads, Those who are looking for life go on a pilgrimage to the fountain of art. So the lower section is all Zsolnay tile, and then the upper section shows you what it is almost like the three graces in the center. Here they are, holding up Viennese style wreaths. I love all the gold work, which almost has a Viking element to it. And then these are the beautiful orchestra to either side, blowing trumpets. And then these are the pilgrims at the bottom. I'm sure that's Dante, but never, you know, I've yet to actually find a decent description of who is actually represented. If anybody would like to send that to me, I'd be very grateful. You can see it's just signed in the corner there, Aladar. So I mentioned this amazing Franz Joseph cultural house. In modern day Romania, okay, but what was originally Transylvania, Târgu Mureș is its Romanian name. And it's the architectural style is what we refer to as Lechner style. So Odon Lechner, who you'll see later, was the most important architect, really creating a distinctive national Secession style. He had many followers. You can see there that amazing tile roof. Again, Lechner blends Indian architecture with Hungarian folk art to come up with a national style. But my reason for including it here is again to emphasize the importance of folk art, folk stories, and fairy stories and ballads. So the windows here are designed by Ed Vigand and Sandor Nagy, are all to do again with commemorating these heroic elements. So some of the windows go back to life under Attila the Hun. So these are sort of showing native Hungarian life, though the one on the left is known as the cradle of the royal prince Kazabar and is related to a ballad. The other one is showing you a Hungarian farmyard. But the other windows by Sandor Nagy are very much related to great Hungarian folk stories and ballads. So Kata, she has a very sad story. It's Romeo and Juliet. They fall in love. She's a humble girl. The mother doesn't approve. Poor old Katya is drowned. Then the prince commits suicide. But even in death, the queen won't allow them to rest together. She buries them to either side of the altar, so they can't actually rest together. But then the roses grow up and, rather beautifully conjoin the two lovers in death. And the queen, the end of the story, is the queen is cursed. Lovely. In this one, this is the cruel mother, or beautiful Julia. She's not an exemplary mother. She prefers all of her worldly goods to her children and is even prepared to ransom one, which is why you can see the child here begging to be spared down the bottom. Fabulous windows though, aren't they? Using the absolute latest technology, Tiffany type of glass, rippled and coloured within, but also textured, looks like opal in some places. This is Salomon's Sara. Again, please look up these stories because they are complex. But in the centre, she gets seduced by the devil, who's rather fun, as you can see. And then this is her dying on the right-hand side. The important thing is that if you're Hungarian, you know these stories really well. This is another Julia story. And this is, again, it's this idea of finding true happiness in the afterlife. So it's the girl who is taken to heaven, and she's taken there via this rather beautiful ram that appears to her with sort of jewels in her horns. The important thing is the fact that everybody in Hungary is familiar with these stories in the same way that we were familiar with the Morte d'Arthur, and so they are they are an obvious vehicle for artists to again create what they see as a truly Hungarian style. I don't want you to think it's all inward looking. János Vasari clearly was influenced by mainstream symbolism. This is one of his most important paintings in the National Gallery in Hungary, and is known simply as the Golden Age, and shows two lovers offering a tribute to the shrine, or it's actually an altar of Hymen, with a lot. I love all this smoke. The frame to either side, typically symbolist, is representing sort of vapor, sort of like the incense that they are burning. János Vasari is often seen to be their sort of like Gustav Klimt figure, in that he has a very obvious symbolist phase. Here, the return of spring, the living key. And what I particularly want you to know is the way in which the design has left, or the painting has left and has spread out onto the frame. The frame has become an integral part of the work of art, which is typical of the Secession vision, that you combine frame with the painting. So the trees, as you can see, literally continue outside the painting onto the frame. And we're going to stop in just 2 seconds, but I just wanted to introduce you to the last of the really important artist colony. We're going back to Romania. This is now Maramureș. I showed you where it was on the map. It's now partly in Romania and partly in Ukraine, but they all go here again because of this Transylvanian connection, and they settle at Nagybanya. That's the sort of epicenter of this artist colony, and we're going to sort of see this again, this sort of like idea of a bit like Newlyn School or Glasgow School, of these artists heading to sort of fight to form a brotherhood where they all paint. Bella Ivan Gunevald, one of the leading figures, Karoli Ferenczak, and most importantly here, the one at the beginning, is Simon Holosay. And I should just mention at this moment in time that they all have to leave Hungary to get an art education because there is no academy in Budapest. So they don't really want to go to Vienna. There's that sort of antipathy. So they frequently head to Munich, which is where Simon Holosay founded his own art school, Holosay. And even more importantly, they all head to Paris. So after we've had our break, I shall show you some works by these artists to show you how influenced they were by their sojourn in Paris, where they would have, in the 1890s, become aware of Van Gogh, and even more so Gauguin, how they learn abroad, but then take their ideas back to Hungary, and then most importantly, found this Nagybanya colony in what is today Romania.